Hi everybody, welcome to Business Straight Talk. We're going to have Bren and Tim Rowe from the Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Today, the breeding world react to the loss of Wootton Bassett, the upside for the autumn sun, and first season sires making their mark already. We also have an extensive chat with Inglis James Price about the rise of racing in China and the importance of the Asian market. In racing, what does Racing New South Wales show cause and notice to the ATC really mean? Board and steward questions in Tassie as well. While in wagering, are we seeing the end of the grey market? Speaking of grey market, Tim Rowe joins us now. Tim, great to have you on board. We'll go from, obviously, a rather sad sort of way to start things off with the death of Wootton Bassett yesterday, and obviously significantly felt by Coolmore. It was a difficult, it's always difficult when you lose a stallion, but one of such value and such worth and such importance for Coolmore. It was a significant moment, wasn't it?
Just first, we're lucky the Straight doesn't have a HR department, so we'll just move on. It's okay. But yeah, on Wootton Bassett, it is as you say, it's a devastating blow for Coolmore, and speaking to some of those guys at Coolmore, yes, the commercial impacts are massive, but it's those that deal with the horse day to day. They were devastated, particularly as they became as a shock, it was a choke, a condition that led to pneumonia and brought to his rapid death, really. And they knew it was coming for a couple of days. They flew in vets from America and called on old vets, John Freestone. So they did everything to try and save him, and they just couldn't. And he's quite what he's done as a stallion is quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge blow here in Australia. Even bigger blow over in Europe, where he's made such a massive, in Ireland and Great Britain, where he's made such a massive mark there with his first crop from Coolmore. Obviously, started off in France and made a massive impression there, and came up from nowhere, effectively. I think 40-odd foals in his first crop, wasn't it, Tim? And was able to build up to become, some great stats there. And in 2020, Coolmore came knocking with an enormous offer in around to 100 million Australian dollars, to bring him to Ireland. It was significant for Coolmore because they knew that Galileo was coming to his end, and as it turned out, I think they had one season together at Coolmore in Ireland. They saw him as an heir for Galileo in terms of just pushing that through, albeit he was an older stallion. I think he was 14 or whatever when he first joined Coolmore, but they knew that he was going to be actually, and the results were already there. Like, just the stats he's able to produce for his first two crops over there are just outstanding. I know in Australia, his first crop have only just turned 3. He hasn't had any stakes winners here yet, but he's had a lot of winners and a lot of horses that look like Tim they could sort of start write his name up in lights the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, there's one at Warwick Farm on Wednesday from John O'Shea and Tom Charlton and James McDonald Road that I know they've got a big opinion of, and yeah, from his European crop, 10 group winners from his first Coolmore conceived crop. And it doesn't always work out like that, where stallions, get better mares and the stats don't improve. I'd say Coolmore would admit they bought in Costa del Lago a long time ago, and his stats didn't improve from Blue Gum and Victoria, really. But yeah, Wootton Bassett has 10 group winners in his first crop, which is 3 more than Danehill and Galileo.
And six of those Group 1 winners too, Tim. I think most of them Colts too for me. I think it was one filly, but most of them Colts. So, which is great for Coolmore because it obviously gives them an opportunity to build on top of that. But those stats are just, are ridiculously strong. And there's been some commentary sort of in Australia, some ill-informed commentary about his efforts here or whatever else. Like, settle down, people. Let's just wait a little while to see what happens, because he got some outstanding mares here. And we know he stood for the record fee this year. It's around 85,000, and that'll stand for a fair while, I think, that record. But, people love to, I guess, knock down a tall poppy around that stuff. But there's no doubt he will have multiple Group 1 winners in Australia with the quality of horses he's had. He's had, as I said, he had 4 books plus, whatever he's had so far this year. It's a very small book, probably of maybe 10 or 15 mares since September 1. Yeah, it's a moment for Coolmore, and obviously it's an emotional moment. And look, let's face it, Coolmore are an emotional organisation. They're not a cold, hard corporation. It's the way that they work. They built their success on these champion stallions, be it, Danehill back in the older days, Galileo, and then now, of course, with Wootton Bassett as well. So speaking of stallions, Tim, and also Galileo kicked in there, the autumn sun, obviously he was a stallion who we were a bit worried about this time last year. He missed a season with a pelvic issue, which is not something you want to have happen as a stallion, obviously. That was obviously a difficult moment for Arrowfield, but his progeny continued to win on the track. He's obviously back servicing the barn, and things are going well with him as well. His upside's quite significant from here, isn't it?
As in, you had 2 winners at Flemington on Sunday, and you can argue about the depth of the Derby and Oaks previews, and the Oaks one went at a canter, but still to sire those two winners when some of the sections of the industry bemoaning the lack of staying stallions, and as John Massaro told me, if you send a fast mare to the Autumn Sun, you can get a good sprinter miler, and if you send a mare with a bit of stamina, you can breed a very nice stayer. And he's obviously missed last year, but he's got yearlings that sort of 60 odd or his lowest numbers, so there is going to be a halt to his momentum, but he's getting 150, 160 mares of quality this year. And I did actually speak to Richard Rutherford, who bred Autumn Boy this week, and the dam just had a hellbent filly at Amarina recently, and she's due to be served next week by the Autumn Sun. So, go back there, nice Saberbill mare. So we're looking, given Wootton Bassett's gone, Sitzel's died, Fastnet Rocket been pensioned, Written Tycoon's probably, not long left in terms of, well, he's private anyway. You're looking for that next commercial stallion outside I'm Invincible and Zoostar, and hopefully the Autumn Sun is part of that.
Yeah. I mean, what you talked back about before about those mares, that's what John Massaro would have said about British Choice. And no doubt what was said about Danehill, that you send, depending on what mare you get through, you get that type of horse. So, they're the sort of reliable producers you need. And his records only get stronger to stronger. And speaking of size, of course, positive news out of the first season size, Stay Inside and Home Affairs out of the first Sydney trials on Monday, Tim. Yeah, Home Affairs, like you want to see them fast and early, but you want to see them fast. And a couple of those Home Affairs winners were very impressive, as was the Stay Inside winner. So there's plenty there to keep the, the nominations ticking over, but the enthusiasm for those high-profile first season size Home Affairs, of course, the Coolmore Stud Stakes winner and Stay Inside a Golden Slipper winner.
Yeah, again, those trials probably they're not as important as maybe they once were, and certainly, as we said, I think it was on this podcast last week. Newgate, for instance, didn't have any 2-year-old runners this week or trialers, but history shows there was 10 stakes winners out of last year's heats. Raging Force didn't run immediately after trialling, but he's come through the winter and won a stakes race at 3. So there will be some good horses there, and obviously Joe Waterhouse and Adrian Bott had trained a lot of the winners, but horses behind them obviously have talent, and the constitution to race or trial at this stage is a good sign going forward that a proportion of them are going to make their mark.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an interesting one too, seeing Gay and Robbie Waterhouse both at those trials on on Monday, along with Adrian Bott as well. But maybe Gay's getting to the point now about the time of our life where she's like, well, what are we waiting around forever for these horses? Let's get them out. I mean, they've always got a terrific record with their 2-year-olds. Yeah, and obviously they'll have the dominant favourites probably for both the Breeders' Plate and the Jingo. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about emerging stallions. Now let me throw another one into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders can stop calling him the best-looking stallion on Darley's roster. And that's on top of being champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part, his foals are just as sharp-looking as he is, like Too Darn Hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. He's staring you right at the face. Native Trail, standing at Darley Kelvin's side for $27,500. Now joining us on Straight Talk is James Price, Inglis Victorian Bloodstock Manager. James, your remit has extended far further than Victoria over the last couple of weeks. You've just returned from a trip to Hong Kong and China with Inglis's representative, Nikki Wong. I guess, what was your impression of where Chinese racing is at the moment?
It was a fantastic trip. Obviously, took in China at the beginning of the trip. Mr. Zhang, what he's doing over there is just quite extraordinary. I mean, we've seen his investment, closer to home in Australia, and then obviously into Europe and America and all these other countries. But to actually go to his mainland and see his investment is quite extraordinary. Yeah. In terms of infrastructure, in terms of horses, and I think what's far mind-boggling is the opportunity for profit and to earn money there when there's no gambling and no real sustained industry is extraordinary. I mean, he's just putting up front all this money to encourage mainland Chinese people who already love the horse, but to love horse racing as well. So it was fascinating, and all credit to him. And these gentlemen who want to put this money in we wish them all the best. He could quite frankly be buying boats, he could be buying cars, he could be buying properties, which look, I'm sure he's doing anyway. But the fact that he's willing to invest in horses, we wish him all the success because we all set to benefit from it.
And one of those events in China, James, was the Yulong sale. Talk us through that, what that's like in comparison to Australian, Australasian sales and how it works over there.
So it's set in a sale ring on what is part of the sort of the Yulong Jockey Club precinct, which is all-encompassing racetrack, sales auditorium, offices, paddocks, stallion barns, the whole box and dice on this one property. So it's a sale auditorium which is as good as any auditorium you'll see in the world. And so it was a sale on the Friday which had about 60 thoroughbreds, and then there are a few other sort of pleasure horses. He did a quick stay-in parade of the stallions that he stands in China. And at the end of the sale, there's a few alpacas, a few donkeys, so it was sort of quite entertaining. But the sale itself, in the past, it's been horses that were not just owned by Mr. Zhang, but this sale was 60 thoroughbreds, all owned by Mr. Zhang, from mainly racehorses and young horses. Interestingly, he had a horse that actually passed in. It was an Alabama Express. He passed it in. He won a 2.5 million RMB, and he passed it in. It was a horse that was 2 from 2 in China, and it was favourite for the 3 million RMB race the next day, which the horse actually won. So he knew his form. He was willing to put 2.5 million reserve on it, and managed to win the race next year. Like, we're talking about a $3 million RMB race, which is equivalent to about $650,000 in prize money. So it's significant investment. Interestingly, the auctioneer is a female auctioneer who started auctioneering pigeons. Obviously, China is fascinated with pigeon racing, so she's learned her craft with pigeons and spent some time overseas with other sales companies, but now is the sole auctioneer. So, like the old days in Australia, Mr. John Inglis stood up there and sold the entire day. She stood up there and sold for what would have been 6 hours. So full credit to Teresa.
Yeah. Somebody might come back, tell a few of the English guys to pick up their act. They take a break after 40 minutes. They've got to pick it up a bit. It is interesting. You talk about selling pigeons. Like, if you go back through history, a lot of these auctioneers, apply their craft across so many different areas, whether it be cattle, back in the old days with tobacco, a lot of this stuff came back from auctioneering tobacco. So there is a strong history of auctioneers coming from different areas. And, we obviously see that with some of the auctioneers that work in the space in Australia, then go back and, work in, domestic auctions or whatever else, or other real estate or whatever else. So the skills are transferable, but it is fascinating to see in another context, isn't it, James?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm no auctioneer, but it's certainly it's a skill that you have, and you can apply it to different fields. And I suppose it's about standing up there and sort of semi-entertaining the crowd. So whether you're selling tobacco, horses, or pigeons, it's a craft that can be used. And she did have a support there to help with breeding of the pedigrees and that sort of thing. But no, full credit to her. We might see her in Oz at some point.
Yeah, that'd be very fascinating. The race day as well. I mean, what was that like? You got to see a couple of English graduates, as I think I saw there as well. But that was in Ho Hot. Talk us through sort of what that looked like, and I guess your impression of how that's developed over time.
Yeah, so the race day itself was on the Yulong precinct. So I think we know sort of Zhang's setup. We think it's in Ho Hot, which is where you actually fly into, but it's actually 3 hours south. Ho Hot is in a county called Inner Mongolia, which is part of China. But Mr. Zhang's setup is actually in Shenzhen. No, not Shenzhen. Shenzhou, which is 3 hours drive south, in his hometown called Youyu, which is where his setup is. So that's where the race day was. It's a racetrack very much built, I would say it's a sort of oval 1,600 metre track. The majority of the races were 1,200 metres down the back straight and around the home turn. Look, the home turn is quite tight, but there were, we had 6 races, very much similar to Hong Kong, half an hour in between. And the horses looked terrific. They were incredibly well cared for. Very much, I think, there's a good relationship between Mr. Zhang and also the Hong Kong Jockey Club. There are horses from the Hong Kong Jockey Club. There's 52 horses now on Mr. Zhang's site being rehoused and rehomed. So there's a really good relationship happening there. And there were representatives of the Jockey Club there for the race day. They also were, obviously with that rehoming program going on, they also were there to help manage the track itself. So there were 4 representatives from Chung Fa's track management team. They're, managing the track throughout the day and in the days prior to have the best racing surface possible for the horses. So there's a real sort of intertwining relationship going on, which is fantastic. I think Jockey Club obviously see they've obviously got a mandate at the moment to try and broaden their ownership group, and their focus is very much on mainland China. So the more they can be doing there, the better off. So the race day there would have been maybe sort of 200 participants there, majority of them participating in the industry, but then the stand did have some people, local people probably just sitting there watching. Obviously there's no gambling, there were probably little bets between mates and that sort of thing, as tends to happen, but no, it went off really well. Next year there'll be a $3 million RMB race, which is around that sort of $600,000-$700,000, but Mr. Zhang wants to raise the race day next year to 10 million RMB.
Wow.
So, we're looking at over $2 million Australian in prize money. So that will be, obviously you have to be a member of the Chinese Horse Owners Association, which we've just got a partnership with. And that's obviously Mr. Huan is the general secretary of that. Mr. Huan and Mr. Zhang are very close friends. So they've led that. So it's very exciting for Inglis to combine with them. Interestingly, we had last year at the Breeze Up sale, we had 1 horse sold to mainland China interest, which was sold to Mr. Huan. It was a Blue Point colt he bought for $155,000 at the sale last year. He actually ran second in the race to the unbeaten Alabama Express of Mr. Zhang. So there was a bit of friendly rivalry there between Mr. Zhang and Mr. Huan. But so with that 10 million RMB race next year, it's going to bring real focus to the Breeze Up sale next year, for those mainland owners to come and participate in the sale and hopefully have a runner in the race next year.
Sort of touched on there. Most people would know Yulong and Mr. Zhang, but there is other interest there from other parties that are really starting to increase their investment and appreciate racing in China, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. And Mr. Zhang has very much led that charge. And, obviously there's the language barrier that many Chinese people struggle with in terms of trying to get into the industry. They've got this, you fly into Ho Hot and there's these statues of horses just on the corners of streets. So they've obviously got a passion for the horse. It's just holding their hands and guiding them to the industry. So Mr. Zhang, I think he really sees himself as a flag bearer for racing and also the horse itself in mainland China. So I think the more we can get around Mr. Zhang, he'll lead us to these new owners, which is fantastic. Case in point, the new alliance we have with the Chinese Racehorse Association. People see Mr. Zhang as a real sort of pinnacle of the industry, and so they just want to follow him and support him. So there were people in Hong Kong at that Yulong race day, and they're looking for a horse to race in China next year just to support Mr. Zhang and what he's doing for racing. So it's quite extraordinary. Mm.
Yeah. And then from a breeding side, James talks about, we've seen some of the stallions from over here being exported to China, Rubik being an example, I think Vancouver, another one as well. But how significant is the breeding opportunity in China, do you feel? Obviously short term, it builds it up, but even longer term?
Yeah, I think, with support like Mr. Zhang and Mr. Huan. So Rubik's an interesting point. Someone asked me, did I see Rubik? But no, I didn't see Rubik because he was bought by Mr. Huan and his breeding operations 3 or 4 hours east of where Mr. Zhang's set up. So I didn't see him. But yeah, I went around the stud and saw maybe 150 mares, 150 foals, and they all looked in fantastic condition. Amazingly, they've got a horse handler or a horse husbandry person with horses 24 hours. So even in the middle of the night, there's someone there caring for the horses. They look fantastic, fed amazingly. So there's certainly opportunities there to breed. I suppose there's a huge amount of land.
Yeah.
in mainland. So as long as they can, I suppose, yeah, I think there's certainly opportunity, but probably, I mean, Mr. Zhang would probably identify that the horse husbandry skills are very good at the top. It's now about supporting what's underneath that to sort of to carry the industry through.
Yeah, and sort of develop that scale. I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, to get to scale, you need, as we know in Australia, you need so many qualified and skilled people to be able to do that, don't you? So that's probably part of the challenge. And getting the good horses or getting the quality of bloodstock probably won't be an issue for Mr. Zhang, but getting to that level of having the capability around those horses will be key, won't it?
Yeah, I think so. And also we look at, we talk about mainland, but we above China is obviously Mongolia. Mongolia being different to Inner Mongolia, and Mongolians have had a love for horses for centuries upon centuries. But I think they're starting to look at opportunities in thoroughbreds rather than just the Mongolian pony, as we call it. So I think Mr. Zhang sees opportunity there. We've got some Mongolian owners racing horses here. They've had some success with Danny O'Brien. They bought some horses at the yearling sales this year. So, we'll start to see a bit of an influx of Mongolian-owned horses here in Australia, but then see horses extend to and have racing up there.
And further on the partnership with the China Horse Owners Alliance, what does that involve? Is that like an exclusive thing with Inglis, or does it prevent them going from other sales? How's that going to work?
No, it's just an alliance, so it's not exclusive to Inglis. The head of the alliance is Amy Feng. She wears a few hats. She also supports Magic Moon. She supports Arcana, but as head of the Owners Association and now with our alliance, she'll be working with us as well. She'll be at our sale next month, and basically she provides a supporting role for those Chinese owners wanting to invest and attend the sales. So it's not exclusive; it just strengthens the opportunity for those owners to purchase at our sales.
So do we expect sort of greater mainland China participation at the sale next month, James, or is that sort of like just coming as time comes through? I mean, what sort of time frame we're looking at here in terms of, I guess, that greater engagement from the Chinese owners?
Oh, I think we'll certainly see. We only saw one last year bought from mainland China on the results, but I think certainly we'll have. I would anticipate Mr. Huan will definitely be here. I think he's aiming to buy 2, and there's probably a couple of other owners looking to participate in the sale. So certainly the numbers from China itself will hopefully grow at the sale next month.
And how important is it, people like yourself, James, going to China and Hong Kong, and as we know, Nicky Wong's been in Philippines and in Malaysia at the moment, to have representatives on the ground, and all the sales companies do it, but to forge that face-to-face relationship with your Asian clients?
I think it's vital. I think the face-to-face meetings are crucial. I think it's well identified that relationships with Asian business people is very much built on trust. So you have to build that trust, and that trust comes with time. It doesn't just come with one meeting. And, I was in Hong Kong 4 times last year, and that's my second trip this year. Nicky has been there 3 times already. He's got another 2 trips after this trip when he gets back. So it's very much just face-to-face meetings, but also face recognition. You go to the races and you walk into the parade ring, and, you just acknowledge people you might not have met, but you're a familiar face to them. So it very much helps. It also, we're in a very fortunate position at Inglis that our graduates are doing extremely well, particularly in Hong Kong. So it's a good news story that we can share with them, and they have confidence in us as individuals that they're happy to rely on us, but they've got confidence in what we're selling them at Inglis, that that horse can go on and be hopefully a successful racehorse for them.
And obviously, I said Hong Kong, going from China to Hong Kong, different vibe. It's obviously very mature market. There's it's a very sophisticated professional market there. Obviously good to get to the races as well and see Kai Ying rising in his last run before the Everest.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, everyone sort of says, what's he like? And he's an incredibly wonderful specimen to look at, and he's obviously got an amazing heart and amazing set of lungs. So yeah, he's quite extraordinary. And as we know, these sort of horses, they develop the next generation of racing fans. So it was fantastic to see him on day one of the carnival. And it's a much different industry in Hong Kong than it is China, and it's very much evolving. I think we're looking at a much younger ownership base. people, they're obviously broadening their ownership base. So it's not just sort of the middle to upper generations owning horses. It's much younger people, men and women in their 30s and 40s, and that generation want to get involved. They don't just want to rely on an agent or a trainer to buy the horses. They want to have input. And obviously in the technology era that we're in, they have those skills and have everything at their fingertips to make those decisions. And that's why we see, far more owners here at our sales, here at our races, because they want to be involved. They love the horse, and they want to take part in what they buy. That's why we have these people visiting Australia all the time, going to their stud farms to pat these horses and look after these horses and make the decisions themselves. So it's very, very exciting. And obviously, I think, you wonder, you ask why are they buying far more horses from the Southern Hemisphere than Europe? I think the time zone obviously works with them. They can watch Australian racing. They can be here and participate in the Australian industry. I think the familiarity that particularly trainers have with the Australian Southern Hemisphere product is very noticeable now. I mean, you look at the new trainers that have gone in there. David Eustace is obviously an Englishman, but he's trained here in Australia. Mark Newnham doing very well. You look at James Cummings about to go in there. Brett Crawford's just arrived in there. He obviously had huge success in South Africa. He knows the Australian product with Group 1 winners like Run Fox Run. Even, I suppose you look at the sort of the local born trainers like Pierre Ung, who's young, but he obviously trained in Australia under David Hayes, Chris Waller, Mick Price, David Payne. So there's very much an understanding of, Australian training methods, Australian bloodstock. And probably a very interesting fact is this season, 87% of the winners have been Southern Hemisphere bred. So we're looking at 45 races, 39 have been bred in the Southern Hemisphere. So we're seeing, obviously that's sort of chicken and the egg, the winners start coming, and then more horses from the Southern Hemisphere. So we're on a pretty good roll. Even you look at horses, even you look at the Hong Kong Derby, which I think people sort of probably put up there as the number one race they want to win in Hong Kong. We're looking at a 2,000 metre race for 4-year-olds. You would think that there would be an inclination that those winners would be coming from Europe, but 8 of the last 10 have been bred in the Southern Hemisphere. Your Cap Ferrat, Voyage Bubble. So it's we're on a pretty good run down here.
Therefore, you think that momentum will flow onto the sale next month with big Hong Kong contingent, James?
Yeah, I think so. I think very, very clearly our sale has had the best. Last season, our sale has had the best record of any breeze up sale in the Southern Hemisphere. We're getting terrific results, and that's very much down to the vendors. They're buying much better stock to support the sale with. The vendors are very educated, very skilled at raising these horses, so buyers can come to the sale knowing that they're going to get a product that's going to be well suited to Hong Kong. The top horse in Hong Kong, Ruby Lot, he'll go round on Sunday for David Hayes, appearing for the first time this season. He's our flag bearer. He was very competitive in the 4-year-old series last year. So again, people can come to the sale and, based off the graduates that have gone through the sale in recent years, come and buy a product that can be competitive in Hong Kong, which is what some people rate as the toughest jurisdiction in the world to race in.
And you came home obviously from Hong Kong, but Nicky's off to Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. I think you mentioned Korea might have been on the agenda as well. He's a very busy man, but I mean, you'd expect, given the effort you've put in there, there'd be a strong, broad participation from Asian buyers in Sydney next month at the regular race sale, James.
Yeah, we think so. Look. Obviously we've strategically placed the ready to race sale last year was on Tuesday. We've strategically placed it on a Thursday, and noting that we felt Ying Rising would be running in the Everest. So there's no doubt that will bring a lot of people to Sydney, mainly for the races, but there'll also be increased participation in the sale. There'll be a lot of faces, and I suppose it's a word of caution to vendors not to get too excited about, everyone they see at the sale. They're not all going to be bites. Let's just be cautious on that. But Yeah, no, it'll have strong interest. You know, we've really pushed hard, particularly with Malaysia. I think the English digital platform this year has sold, I think, about 90 horses now to Malaysia. They're obviously found it tricky in terms of they need 300 or 400 horses per year to sustain their racing in Selangor now that Macau and Singapore have shut down. So they really had to find a different avenue, which has really strengthened the digital site. So with their buying through the digital site, it's really forced Inglis into their lounge rooms and established some really good relationships. So we're fortunate to have them, and they'll be represented at the sale. And it's Simon Dunderdale, who's champion trainer up there. He was the first supporter of our sale, and now there'll be other parties like Captain Tan's party will be there, and a few other trainers coming. So, and then look forward to hearing what Nikki has in store from the Philippines and Thailand, and still there are some owners in Singapore who will be attending the sale. They're obviously not racing in Singapore, but Singapore being in close proximity to Malaysia, they like to have their horses raced there. So there'll be some good representation. Obviously, our battle with the ready to race sale in the past has been having buyers sort of that 100, K north, and it's finding buyers in that middle range. So having Nicky join our team has been absolutely sort of fantastic. His connections in those countries is really, really good, and it's just gonna strengthen. So when I left Nicky last Sunday night, he had 5 countries to go to, and my goodness, I don't know how he does it, but Inglis is very, very lucky to have him.
Terrific, James. It was great to catch up. Really insightful chat, and all the best for the sale next month.
Good on you. Thanks, guys.
James Stone.
Rightio, Tim. The ATC provide us with their fair share of headlines in our time in straight, Racing New South Wales as well, and the two of them have got together in a blockbuster blue. Like, this is an interesting one. Obviously, we alluded to last week that there was a bit going on in the ATC. Last week, we saw 2 board members resign, which was a significant moment, and that precipitated its own sort of reaction. And just take us through what happened from there. What is this Racing New South Wales show cause action about?
So, first of all, it'd be hard to miss it, but obviously the ATC board removed its CEO, Matt Galanos, on Monday or Tuesday, and then Ben Bayo and Natalie Houston resigned on Thursday, and Ben sent me some pretty stinging comments about his beliefs that the ATC board couldn't, go on as it is under that leadership, and holds great concern about the finances of the ATC. And then obviously Friday, the ATC current board members have fought back and have defended their position. And then on Monday, out comes, there's a show cause hearing, and then Racing New South Wales on Monday sort of pretty much released their case open from the chair, Sarah Ann Cook, which was, it's interesting from my point of view that it was Sarah Ann Cook's name on that document, because there is a lot of, it's Peter V'landys versus the ATC, or the industry versus Peter V'landys. And I think it was very deliberate that it was from Sarah Ann Cook to say, no, it's not Peter. The board is behind Peter as well, or it is Racing New South Wales leading this, not just Peter. And I'm not, who wrote the document exactly and Sarah Ann Cook, I'm not sure, but certainly I think that was quite interesting and intriguing the way that came out and whose name was on it. Yeah,
and I don't want to talk about personality as much as they want, but it's absolutely clear that whatever happens at Racing New South Wales, the CEO and the executive and the board are in lockstep on this stuff. There's very little dissent amongst the Racing New South Wales board about that. I think probably what was surprising was you offer someone a show cause hearing, and then pretty much you put your prosecution on the table and say, well, this is what you're dealing with, publicly. Not just privately, but publicly. So it's quite embarrassing for the ATC to have that put out there. They've disputed a few of the figures, but haven't said what figures they're not happy with. There's probably a few in there that raised a few eyebrows or a few things, but we haven't seen the workings yet put forward and work all that out. But anyway, I guess that was the aspect that surprised me a little bit, that it was so pointed. It's like a withering fast bowler spell. There was bounces, whistling past the ATC's ears everywhere. With this one, it was quite stinging in the way that it was done. I think I described it as brutal, and I think, it probably does sum up the concern that Racing New South Wales have. And now there's a broader context here that people are talking about. Well, is this Racing New South Wales' method of taking over the ATC in terms of administration and doing the things they want to do. And the first thing that comes up is the Rose Hill sale. Now, there's no example, there's no evidence that Racing New South Wales are planning to do that. But you can understand, given the nature of the Rose Hill debate, why people think that might be the case. And there's a whole bunch of other concerns, Tim. We get a lot of responses from a lot of different people around these issues. It's an interesting one because it's racing politics, but everyone seems to have a view on it. We're talking about 11,000 ATC members, but it extends far beyond that. Yeah, there's a lot of questions here. For me, it raised a few broader questions, Tim, around the role of clubs in Australia. And if this is the model, this is the funding model, particularly New South Wales racing, which is supposed to fund the clubs, it's not doing its job. The model's broken. So either you change the model to help the clubs, or you change the entire structure whereby the clubs have a much diminished role and are effectively, as I said in my article, turning on the lights in the Bay Marie and pouring the beers and, basically venue hosts, which I don't think people want, especially with the ATC. So I think there's a bit to play out here. This has been a while coming, this blue, but it's not a great time of year for racing to be doing this and having these discussions so openly. And so I guess, having all that sort of dirty laundry chucked out there, is it, Tim?
No, and I did make a few calls to other administrators or people just to try and get a handle of how the Racing New South Wales and then clubs' relationship works in terms of finances. And as you wrote in your analysis piece, that the Racing New South Wales, the money has changed from basically 2012 onwards. The power or a lot of the, let's say, country clubs and all racing clubs in New South Wales, majority, they rely on those handouts, but they're not sure. There's no transparency, they're saying or arguing about how much of the turnover they're generating on their meetings. Outside, they can follow the tab turnover and Betfair, they can monitor, and get a fair idea. But in terms of corporate turnover, how much they're actually generating, and therefore are they getting a fair share of that revenue back in return to run their club and, tracks and all sorts of different investments and plan for the future while they get their handouts, annual or 6-monthly handouts, they're fine, but there's still no certainty that, leaders of the Racing New South Wales, as it was put to me, can turn the taps off at any stage, and then clubs are in a world of hurt. While the money keeps coming in, they're okay, but there's no guarantee of that. And, that's why there is that potential arguable power imbalance, some would argue, because Racing New South Wales holds so much financial power.
The ATC annual report, which is usually put out sort of mid to late October, will be interesting reading, as with the Racing New South Wales annual report. Not expecting a lot of detail in there, but we would expect that we may get some view of what the Rose Hill process cost the New South Wales racing industry, and ultimately being a failed process at this stage. So interesting how that works out. Of course, New South Wales is not the only state with challenges at the moment. Racing Victoria's short 2 board members. We'll have a story on that later this week. Tasmania's just put out, or Tas Racing's just put out a call for 4 board members for vacancies to be filled, 2 of which will probably be filled by existing board members, but 2 which have to be filled by new board members. There's some aspect that there may be a change of leadership down there in terms of the chairmanship as well in the near future. Jean Fair's time expires May next year. So there's a bit going on in that space as well. And Tasmania's had its own challenges, of course, this week with further issues with the steward stood down a thoroughbred meeting in Devonport. Bear in mind that there's only 1 meeting a week in Tasmania, so you would think that would not be an issue. But anyway, that comes off hot on the heels of another unrelated issue where, stewards were found to be betting on races. So, there's challenges in that space as well. And the other one too is Brisbane Racing Clubs will have their annual general meeting in about 3 weeks' time, and they've got, I think, 3 vacancies on their board of 5 people going for that. So it's a time of year where we see a lot of change. As we've spoken last week, the MRC haven't got that change at the moment, but it's also a time of year when we start to see the financial temperature, I suppose, of the industry through these annual reports. So we'll keep a close eye on that. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The strongest collection of sire power ever assembled for an Australian 2-year-old sale will be offered at the Inglis Ready to Race sale on Thursday, October 16th. A catalogue of 222 lots have been finalised for the auction and is now available on the Inglis website. The Inglis Ready to Race sale is easily the best and most progressive 2-year-old sale in the country. It has provided almost 800 individual winning graduates since 2016 at an average earning per runner of over $111,000, some 35% higher than its nearest rival. It also has the highest winners to runners ratio of any Southern Hemisphere breeze-up sale. Breeze-ups are being held at Warwick Farm, Taupo, Wangaratta ahead of the sale, with vision uploaded to the Inglis website. Check out the catalogue at inglis.com.au. Finally, Tim, in wagering, an interesting story this week out of Estonia. Not something I would readily be going to put out there to start with, but sportsbet.io is a major crypto sportsbook around the world in the same league or somewhere in the same league of the likes of Stake and Shuffle, which you've spoken about a bit on the straight. Sportsbet.io is owned by a company called YOLO and YOLO Group. YOLO Group is owned primarily 71% on that this morning by an Australian called Tim Heath. So Australians have got a very strong hold in this crypto market, and the majority of this crypto market is what's called the grey market. I don't want to offend you again, Tim, but the grey market is obviously that market that exists, what they call pre-regulatory. So they operate in territories and countries where there is no regulations put in place as yet around online gambling. If we look at Australia's obviously got regulation around this. So Australia is not a place the grey market is supposed to operate. In fact, if any of these services offer to Australians, they are breaching Australian law. What is interesting about the YOLO Group is that they've decided now that they're going to go purely down the regulated path. They're closing down, I think it's I want to call it Big Casino or some name like that. I can't remember the name of the thing. But sportsbet.io closing down their businesses, their brands, and focusing on a single YOLO brand, which will be based still out of Estonia in terms of operationally, with licenses there, but also be licensed as well or sub-licensed out of the UAE with a cryptocurrency view on this. They want to change the world's view about cryptocurrency and the way it interacts with gambling. They want to do this through a regulated environment. Why is this important? We've spoken about the grey market and black market a lot over the last couple of years on the stroke. It does take up a significant amount of the global market and the challenge around it. So what they want to do is it's basically these big providers now moving into legitimate markets, and it wouldn't surprise in the next 12 months to see the likes of Stake and Shuffle look to do the same. The reason, well, A, they want to do the right thing, but B, if you want to have investors in your company and make your companies go public and whatever else, you have to operate in regulated environments. So if the investors in Stake want to realise the full value of their operation, they're going to have to work in a fully regulated environment, and they're moving towards that as well. So that's just the nature of it. Anyway, it's an interesting little step. There's been rumours of Stake setting up in Australia, Tim, for some time, or at least the Stake EasyGo, I think their name is, the main company that runs Stake to set up their own betting within Australia. That would be interesting given, what they've learnt in Stake, and they can apply that elsewhere. It's an interesting time for that sort of industry. I don't know if you've got a thought. We've spoken a little bit about unregulated gambling as the way things are, Tim, but these big players, big money players, and we're talking about $2 billion of turnover a month on some of these places. That money to start coming back into the regulated system can only be of benefit to a highly regulated market like Australia, surely.
Definitely, if they can regulate, if they can, bet with crypto in Australia, that would be massive. What occurred to me, just what I heard on the radio this morning, another story about how much Australians gamble and lose on gambling, but of course that doesn't take into account that all the unregulated gambling losses in other countries where the data isn't as reliable. So while I'm not condoning losses, it's not as bad as everyone makes out. I don't think it's just not an accurate reflection of how Australia's gambling market fits into world gambling.
Yeah, and that's right. And so there is this concept, this broader concept. Australia is the biggest gamblers per capita in the world. And that stat has spots on it only for the fact that you're talking about highly regulated markets that you're calculating that on, because particularly like the States is now becoming more down that line, but the States was a very unregulated gambling market until about 6 years ago when PASPA was passed. So it's interesting from that point of view. From a local point of view, just a little bit of update. Our old friends, a score update from the BRV Mixie battle. betr now has 27% of PointsBet. Mixie has 66%. If it was a grand final and we're at three-quarter time, it was 66-27. You'd think the game was probably up, but who knows what might happen. Matt Tripp thinks he's still kicking with the wind and can still get over the line. But anyway, interesting perspective from what's going on there. The other story we'll look to cover this week will be the future of greyhound racing in Australia with the Tasmanian ban and the New Zealand ban, and the moves from some bookmakers to suggest that people from those states should not be allowed to bet on greyhound racing, which will reduce the amount of money that the states can get from that. And it's a complex thing, but it's part of the broader campaign to try to preserve greyhound racing. Now, it's an interesting story. I'm digging into it at the moment. Hopefully I'll have something on that next couple of days. All right, thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, and be sure to subscribe. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au, and we'll read out your questions on air and answer them. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.